Tyler Myerly with GALvanize for our Who Not Do series, and I am joined with NFL linebacker, NFLPA vice president, humanitarian, podcaster, and new author of his upcoming book, Let the World See You, which comes out in October. Thank you, Sam Acho, for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Tyler. How are you?
I'm good. We're all hanging in there, you know. We're having fun with this virtual interview, so I'm glad that you joined me a little early your time, a little earlier my time.
No, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here.
So your book that comes out in October is ultimately about not being afraid to be authentic in a world where you are always on. When you think back to the person you were before you decided to let the world see you, how would you describe that person?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really an ongoing process. I think about this book and I think about just the idea of like, how do you share your emotion? How do you talk about anger and sadness and joy and grief and all these different things? And obviously you talk about it being in a world where you feel like you always have to be on, whether in the sports world or even on TV or whatever you do, social media, just feels like there's a lot of pressure. And so the book's about, man, how do you take that pressure off, take that weight off, take that mask off and show the world who you really are. And talks about the benefits that come from that.
Coming from an industry like the NFL where the pressure's always on, when you look back, can you remember, was there ever an exact moment where it hit you that, hey, this isn't the person I want to be?
Yeah, I know for me, there was a season leading up to my 8th year in the NFL, going into training camp, and I just signed a pretty big contract, and it was kind of what everybody thought about and talked about. Like, you signed this great deal, and things are supposed to be great, and they weren't. Things weren't great for whatever reason. Just it seemed like my marriage wasn't going well. Our relationship with my kids wasn't great. Even with my parents wasn't great, and that seemed a little bit isolated. And so I remember just sitting down with a friend and saying, "Hey, man," honestly, I said, "I just want the season to start." So I feel like then I can just get back focused and get back into grind mode. And he said, "Man, if this is what you're feeling right now," he said, I'm kind of afraid of what happens when football ends." And so that was kind of this conversation of, wow, what am I doing with my emotions, and what am I hiding, and what do we all do with our emotions, and what do we hide, and how do we let ourselves be free?
You talked about it scared you because you didn't know what you would do when football ends. Right now, you're a free agent. So when you're kind of in that floating around place, have you learned anything more about yourself that you didn't necessarily know before?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm still learning, right? But I've learned that there's more to me than meets the eye, right? So this book came out of, people could say it came out of nowhere, but I mean, it wasn't like I was planning and hoping and deciding I'm going to write this book. It was just kind of, just an overflow of my heart. And so for me, I love writing and speaking and encouraging. And so that's something that I definitely want to pursue whenever I'm done playing. So it's this idea of just being able to like encourage people and in whatever medium that I can.
Before you decided to be more self-aware and you looked past football and what was after, and it's this big unknown, what was the one thing that you were most afraid would happen if football ended?
Yeah, it wasn't that I was afraid of what would happen if football ended. It was more of me being afraid that people would see me, like the real me, right? Like that I wasn't this big, bad, football player. I was like, I love reading and learning and studying and people and I got my MBA and I just was afraid of what would happen if people saw the real me, right? Emotional, right? Saw my emotions. And what happened was as I started to let people in and they started to see the real me, I wasn't shunned. I was actually embraced. And people said, "Man, it's really good to see you." And that just threw me for a loop because I'm thinking, no, I thought you wanted to see the put together, the well-kept guy. And they said, "No, it's good to see the real you." And so that's where that fear came from of what will happen if people see the real me. And as I'm learning how to let people now see the real me, I'm learning that not only do I receive a freedom, but they also experience the freedom and joy from that as well.
Anywhere else aside from the sports world, being a soft and open person, and you mentioned your MBA, being an educated person, that's something that a lot of people take pride in. Why do you think it wouldn't be perceived well, or why were you afraid that that's not what people would want to see?
Yeah, well, pro sports in particular football, it's very few times you hear the words love and compassion, empathy. Those aren't really words that are highlighted. More words are you got to be tough, you got to be strong, you got to, almost like this idea of having no emotion. It's not just in sports, it's in a lot of different industries. It's in business. Even on social media, people aren't always applauding you when you're talking about your emotions. And so for me, that was the idea of, okay, what will happen if I really show people this other side of me?
So knowing that, and knowing that it's okay to be raw and authentic and genuine, especially in an industry where you're putting the pads on and you're being tough and you're hitting people. If you could describe in words what's your one contribution that you've brought to the table since being your more authentic self, what would that be?
I'll say freedom, but not just for me. It's a freedom to allow others to be themselves as well. I think when I isolate myself or when I hide, I'm not allowing anyone else to experience the full me. And so in that same way, like when I show my fear or my anger or my anxiety, it also allows me to access my joy and my excitement and my passion. But when I try and cut off the negative emotions, I think I also cut off, and we also cut off the positive emotions as well. And so the one word that I would say that describes this book for anybody who wants to read it, right? SamAchoBook.com. For anybody who goes and pre-orders a book and reads a book, the word you'll experience is freedom.
And Sam, in the last 5 months at least, I think a lot of people have noticed a shift in self-reflection. And if you could give your best advice of what you have found has helped you yourself, have you learned anything new within the last 5 months, specifically with everything that's going on? How can people be more genuine?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing I've learned is that it's okay not to be okay. There's no better way to put it, right? And I talked about it, right? So that's what Let the World See You is all about. Let the world see you in your highs and in your lows, you in your ups and in your downs. It's okay for you not to be perfect. It's okay for you not to have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And so that's what I've really learned is that like when we really tap into our emotions, it's almost like you could start a movement.
Well, Sam, it's a weight that you guys as NFL football players carry. I know it's a weight that us women in the sports broadcasting industry carry. It's a great feeling to know that we now have a new ally in each other to lean on if we ever need that help. Everybody, make sure you go and order Sam's book, Let the World See You. I think it'd be a great read right now. So thanks, Sam, for sharing about all of this.
No, thank you so much, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Cool. That was fun.